Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I bet if you are a parent or a grandparent or you work with children in some way, then you want to be conscientious of how you speak to them. You want them to see your best self. You want them to know your best self. But it gets tricky if you grew up in a toxic family, or you had a toxic spouse at one point, or you had a toxic teacher, whatever it is, and you have a yucky voice in your head that sometimes you hear escape out of your mouth. We are here with Amy Williams, and she's going to teach us how to transform that voice so that we can show up as leading those who lead by example for our kids. Hey, how are you, Amy?
Hey, I'm so great. Thanks for inviting me, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, and such an important topic. Is there a specific reason this topic is so important to you?
It's important to me because of my decades of work with families and educators, and most importantly, with children, from infants and toddlers through teenage years. And I have seen firsthand how children, especially young children, are they have what Maria Montessori called an absorbent mind. So they absorb what is around them and kind of embed that into the way that they think about themselves, the way that they treat others. And so as adults, it's important to take a look at and to really be mindful of how am I speaking to the children around me? And is that the voice that I want them to have on the inside as they grow up? Right?
I love that. And earlier today, I was recording a podcast with someone who does mindfulness boxes for kids, and they talked about that toxic voice in their head, like that was just really ugly, and that perfectionist voice, and how they were working to prevent that in kids. And so I love the theme of the day. I love
Yeah.
the theme of the day.
Oh,
So
that's right.
yeah. So what if you see a child from your years in education, can you see a difference in the kids that kind of have emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent parents and those who maybe don't? Can you describe the
Absolutely.
differences?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to remind everybody that it's not just the parental figures that influence the voice that children create and begin to speak to themselves, but it's all the important adults around them, whether it be a teacher or a cousin or somebody next door or somebody, your parents' best friend who is around you a lot. So all of those voices come together to influence how children think about themselves and the concept that they're developing as they grow. And you can certainly see a difference and mostly hear a difference because children will echo what it is that you hear. I mean, I can't tell you how many swear words I've heard used correctly on a primary preschool playground. So that happens, right? I've also seen children be so kind and ask a friend, may I have a hug? And then reply back, thank you for asking me for a hug. Just heard that on the playground yesterday. And I know that this child has parents who believe that that's really important to ask for consent. And on the other side, to say thank you and to notice, thank you for asking me for a hug. I mean, this is a 3-year-old. So definitely this child is saying what she hears, not only from the parents in her life, the family members in her life, but the teachers around her as well. So yeah,
I love it.
I want children to be speaking to each other in ways that are kind and respectful and compassionate and clear and firm if necessary throughout their lives, not only when they're 3, but when they're 13 and when they're 18 and when they're 33, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I recently was talking to my son, and I've now entered this stage of life where I ask him for permission to hug him because he's in middle school. Right. So when he was younger, he was like hanging on me all the time. And it was, that would have been like weird if I'd done that. But now he's got some boundaries, as is age appropriate, as is appropriate. So I asked him this week, I think for the first time, I was like, may I give you a hug? And he was like, yeah, okay, and it was just that type of conversation.
Right. And it's so important that your son hear that you're asking for permission and that you're going to listen to him if he says no, or if he says
Oh,
yes,
sure.
or if he changes his mind, or if yesterday you hugged, but today not so much. So giving that power to children to be able to say an enthusiastic yes and a firm, clear no, and also be able to recognize that and seek that in others so that when they're asking for consent, may I give you a hug? May I give you a kiss? And the other person can say no. And that's cool. What are you going to do with that? I'm disappointed, but they said no. So, okay, maybe tomorrow, maybe another time.
One of the ways with my own kids that I'm disappointed when they say no is when, with social media, like they are also at the age where they don't want me posting certain things, even if I think, oh, it's adorable that my kids did this, right? They have their own boundaries, as is appropriate. I want to teach them, and I say to them, nobody should be posting anything about you on the internet that you're not okay with, and I hate it because sometimes I just think, oh, that's the cutest little moment that could ever exist. And I just, want to tell my friends, but what are the long-term consequences?
Right.
Of if they think I don't have any control of what images go on the internet about me, that's a problem.
Right. And that my mom did that without asking me. So it undermines your reliability and your ability to hold things. I think Brene Brown talks about the V in braving as vault. What are you going to keep private? Even when we think maybe that's private or, oh, that's public. That's adorable. Yeah.
So if you grew up in a home or you have a toxic voice in your head for some reason that sometimes blurts out of your mouth, what are some steps you can do to transform that thinking?
That voice that often, I want to say, the way that we are spoken to as children will come out our mouth. And oftentimes when we are stressed, which all of us are right now, especially when we're not drinking water, when we're not moving our body, when we're not taking time to rest, doing the things that kind of refill our cup, so to speak, those things will blurt out of our mouth more quickly and without a lot of thought, right? So the first step is to reflect and notice it first, right? Alongside doing some self-care, noticing when, whoa, my blood sugar is dipping. I need to eat something right now because my voice is sharper than I want it to be. I'm saying stuff that I wish I hadn't said. Let me take a look at, are there needs that I have that I haven't met yet? And as grownups, that's our responsibility, right? As grownups who are the important adults in the lives of children, it's our responsibility to help children understand and to notice, are there needs that aren't getting met? Do they need a spoonful of peanut butter? Or is it time to stop for a snack? Or is it time to get out of this really loud store? Because the sensory overload can be so much, right? So they're acting in ways where they're not thinking with their frontal lobe that's still under development, right? And we can get to that place when we're not taking care and being mindful of meeting our own needs, right? So getting your own needs met and doing some reflection, that can be really hard, right? We may not realize that the thing that we say has consequences that we don't intend, right? Like, oh, you'll be fine. We might think, well, I heard that from my mama and my grandma, my aunt and my dad. And what is the message that we're saying? Oftentimes when a child is crying and we'll say, oh, you're fine. Oh, get up. You're good. You're strong. You're tough. Well, at that moment, the child might be saying, no, I'm not. That really hurt. I'm bleeding, or my heart is hurt, right? So often when we can stop and just invest that few moments to say, oh, ow, that really hurt. Okay, let's take a deep breath, role model some self-regulation. Let's take a breath. Let's get some water. Let's get some food. Let's move. Let's shake it off. But first, to validate what they're feeling is so powerful, right? And it doesn't have to take 15 minutes of your morning to get out of the house, right? You're trying to get out and the child falls down, or they didn't finish their Lego creation and they're just really upset about that. So just front load some, I know you worked so hard on that and it's time to go. First, validate. And oftentimes, I know as a child growing up, I didn't hear that. I heard, let's go. Daddy said this. As long as your feet are under my table, what I say, go. I mean, that was kind of a message that I heard, that I had to do some self-reflection as a parent of myself. Like, I don't want that for my family unit in my house. I want something different.
Well, and something in the forgiveness of our parents and their previous generation,
Sure.
we live in the information age. We actually have better data than they had. They literally did not have this, So but in breaking generational gaps, we are too removed from a generation, the greatest generation, that type of thing also really swept a lot of things under the rug, like neighbors sexually abusing children and affairs, and I mean some things that they were they kept things together, right? They stayed together and this kind of thing, but there was a lot of sweeping under the rug and some things that didn't get seen. So we're only 2 generations removed from that being the norm and the expectation.
Right. And we get this, we get to decide, how do I want to say that because my dad said that and I turned out fine? And that's really your decision, right? If it's not causing harm to a child emotionally, spiritually, or physically, that is your decision as a parent, right? To continue to say, oh, you're fine. Or, come on, I said so it's time to go. That's really your decision. So once you come from a place of some self-reflection and are mindful of what am I saying, with the knowledge that that's going to become their inner voice. Is that cool with you? Great, carry on. If it's not cool with you, what else can I say? How else can I role model for my child so that they're feeling healthy and confident, and, children who grow up with grit and strength and compassion and a sense of contentment. Yeah.
And I think that grit piece is important, because the parent saying, tough it up, you'll be fine, is trying to instill grit. It's just, what do you see some of the results of that mentality? Or I'm the parent, that's why.
I have lots of thoughts about that, but how long do we have today? So, excuse me. The idea of grit and how to cultivate that in our children can be really complicated and can be easily misunderstood by, toughen yourself up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, we're from Tennessee. We know, we've heard that before. And oftentimes when we say that in an unintended way, we kind of undermine the child feeling confident in being able to pull themselves up by their bootstrap, to be independent, to be self-reliant, right? Because they may not have the skills to pull themselves up, right? So as the important adults in a child's life, if we step forward and say first, wow, that was really hard. Okay, it's time to go. Or, wow, that was really hard. That sounds terrible, or that sounds so sad, or that sounds like it really made you mad. First, we make a connection with that child, and that child, we send the message to the child that, okay, that person gets me, that person cares about me, I am worthy of them to notice and recognize me. Okay, I can trust that person. So I'm watching, as a child, I'm watching to see, okay, how do I pull myself up out of this? I'm having this huge emotion. And as a little kid, that's really scary. I feel so mad. I want to punch somebody, or I want to scratch or bite. And if my adult is freaking out, that's what I equate to a big emotion. Big emotion equals freak out, right? Because that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm learning. So when we kind of front load, I call it front loading that validation, and then giving it a beat to say, here's what you could do to manage that big emotion. And you've got that big emotion and you're not alone. I'm right here. I'm not going to crumble. I'm not going to let you hit. I'm going to help you help yourself. And I know, I see you want to hit, and I'm not going to let you, but I'll be right here. Right. That sends so much more of a message and role models to children what they can do when they're having that big emotion. Right.
I asked one person in education one time, I said, what would happen to education and kids if every mother, because I mainly work with women, was emotionally healthy, managed her emotions well, had great confidence, practiced in self-care so she didn't lose her temper, was able to have healthy relationships with her kids and healthy relationships outside of her kids. And, what would happen if that was the mother every child had? And she just like died laughing. And she said, there wouldn't be any problems in education. Like there would be nothing but as women, so often we just feel that guilt of like, if you were talking about making sure you had water and, some of those things, water and movement and sleep and that kind of thing. There's such a guilt of like, oh, I need to stay up till 11 p.m. to do this huge Lego project to put on Facebook or whatever about this amazing thing, when maybe your child needs you to go to bed early.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
And when we role model that, and as our children get older, we might go to bed before they do. And we're role modeling that this is important. Sleep is important. So I'm going to bed, or I'm feeling frustrated. I'm going to go into the other room and get a glass of water. I feel angry. I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to go take some deep breaths. I'm going to go wash my face. I'm going for a walk around the block. So when we say what it is that we're doing, especially the younger children, it's called sportscasting or narrating what has happened. They're learning like, oh, okay, mom's having a big emotion or dad's having a big emotion, and they're not putting their fist through the wall, or they're not screaming at me or my sibling. They're going to go get some tea, or they're going to go do whatever it is that the adult does that shows healthy management of big emotions, not sweeping it under the rug, but saying, I'm furious, I'm sad, I'm devastated, and I'm going to do this. So that those pieces are so important as children learn.
Well, and I think I need to personally do a better job at naming what I'm going to do instead, because I think I've done a good job in mommy needs a minute. I'll be right back. I do a good job with that, but mommy needs a minute to blank could even up my ante with the kids, right?
Yeah. And you don't have to do it every time, because children are brilliant. And remember, absorbent mind, they will see you. Mommy said she needs a minute. Oh, I'm watching her go into the kitchen and make a cup of tea or whatever it is that you do. And so you don't have to narrate everything, but it's helpful, especially younger children, to say what it is that you're doing, because, the emerging language. So they're developing their language. They're learning about empathy. They're learning about self-regulation, right? So the words are just a small part of it, right? So the tone and the volume that we use is a huge piece of it. And then, like more than 50% of the message that we share is our body, is the movement. Right. So what is mom doing when she says she needs a minute? What's happening with her body? What's happening on her face? All those micro expressions are powerful, and children are absorbing that at a higher rate than the words that we use. Right. Have you ever said to your child, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. No, really, everything's okay. I'm fine. And clearly our tone, we're not fine. Our body says not fine. So what they're going to do is believe our body. And so we give a mixed message, and they start to not believe our words because they don't match, right?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I liked the things that you named off. I do want to point out everything you named off was like physical, or like washing your face, taking a walk, because sometimes I think it's like, oh, let me journal, which is not bad, but then it kind of gets into your head rather than like back into your body, grounding. So I really liked that the things you named were physical rather than more spinning in your head.
Heady, right?
And
that's going to be personal for every person, an individual. Some people might taking a pen to a journal and just getting it out through words on paper, that's their jam, and that's what they do, and that works for them. And whatever a person find that works for them, do that 100%. right?
Yeah.
And, you know, children will be absorbing that to see, how does mom or dad or auntie do that thing? They go and journal. I want to journal for Hanukkah or for Christmas, so I could try
Yeah.
that too. Does that work for me? Right.
Well, let's talk about, you use the word self-regulation twice. And some of my listeners may not be as familiar with that term. Can you describe that term
Sure.
for us?
Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I forget and I use my, my lingo. It doesn't make sense. So self-regulation is the way that we regulate, we bring back to balance ourself, our emotions. So when we feel our emotions get really big and we're feeling jacked up and it's showing on our face and it's coming out our mouth, we can regulate that by, doing the deep breath, moving your body, and coming back to a sense of calm as much as possible. You could still be furious and regulate. So you can hold both of those at the same time, right? So
Yeah.
dysregulated would be being furious and throwing a fist through a wall or screaming at somebody. That's dysregulation. Regulated is being furious and taking some deep breaths, because that's how you're going to get through that emotion. You're going to get through that big emotion. And some people refer to that as an emotional arc. So you start with when that feeling begins, and then it reaches its peak. And then there's a resolution to it where that feeling has passed and we come back more to center, right? So self-regulation is kind of our ability to ride along that arc, right? So when we feel that emotion at first and it reaches its peak, what are we doing to manage that big emotion so the people around us are safe and healthy and happy, right?
So I had a new mother that I was talking to, not on the podcast, but just somebody I had met through a summit I was in, and she talked about co-regulation. So I think that idea kind of goes back to that. If the mother is calm, stable, confident, rested, whatever, there's an actual energy piece to, like, it's going to be easier for your kids to regulate themselves, not only through modeling, but also through, it just
Energy
feels
exchange.
normal. Yeah,
Yeah,
energy exchange. Yeah.
for
You want to speak on
sure.
that at all?
Oh, 100%. What comes to mind first is when a child is showing behavior that is aggressive, right? They're biting or they're hitting or they're kicking or they're screaming at somebody, right? So to co-regulate would be to come alongside that child, and it different than you go to your room because you're in trouble, or go sit in the corner or whatever that is. But to co-regulate is to come alongside that child and, like, actively take a deep breath, or actively come, let's get some water, or you saying you are furious, you are so sad, whatever that big emotion is. By naming it, we're co-regulating, right? And being alongside that child versus separate from that child, we're able to role model regulation and be in that same space with that big emotion and not crumble, right? Like, I got you. That big emotion feels like a huge boulder that fell on your head. I got you. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to be destroyed by this. And I show you, you're not going to be destroyed by this either. So, Sarah, you might have some listeners who have children who were young, and we've been talking a lot about younger children, but you may have some listeners with children who are older.
Are you reading my mind, Amy? I mean, really, I was thinking, because, I have some listeners who, because you're talking about, I'll be here for this. And then there's these situations, you might have a 19-year-old boy who's, about this morning, I had someone who was talking, they had an adult child, they were like 35, and they were doing the same stuff like a 2-year-old does, which is very scary and dangerous when it's a 35-year-old man. I mean, I know we're talking about older kids or teens, but that's a very common thing I hear. And there's a lot of guilt, like, well, I didn't regulate them when they were older, but now they're teens. What do I do?
Right. Like, my children have I lost the window? Has that window closed? And not necessarily. It might be harder now that they're older because habits have already formed, right? And tools of self-regulation, to bring that word back again, have already been ingrained. So when I feel this emotion, I'm going to punch a wall. So they may have learned that that's a great expression of that emotion, right? So when something like that, as they get older, we want to shift, it's never too late. However, it's important to know that it may require more frequency, right? And more mindfulness when that happens. Certainly when your child gets older and bigger and stronger and those big emotions are coming out, we want to make sure that we're feeling safe, that the people around are safe, right? So we wouldn't come as close to them and maintain that eye contact like we would with a younger child, right? But coming alongside on a diagonal, kind of looking down, but remaining present, both feet on the ground, right? Using fewer words is better when somebody is feeling a big emotion. So, true and brief. Often that nonverbal attention that we can give to our children in times when they're not having a big emotion. It's called, Joanne Nordling has a book called Caring Discipline, and she talks about the idea of positive attention at neutral times. And that, I'm glad that we're touching on this. Is this something I want to get out in the world, because it's such a powerful tool that we can use as the important adults in children's lives, whether our child is 3 or 13 or 23 or older, right? But to make that connection with our children during times of neutral, right? They're not doing anything to necessarily please us or displease us. They're not being, particularly awesome, and they're not freaking out. It's during those moments of in between when they enter the room. Toni Morrison talks about, when your child or anybody else's child enters the room, do your eyes light up, right? And it only takes that short moment to build that short moment and high frequency of those moments that can transform a relationship, so that when you have that big emotion, you've got that emotional bank account because you've done that positive attention at neutral times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the key to that is the brief and nonverbal. So if your kid is walking in the room, whether they're 3 or 33, and you've got your iPad out or you're looking at something and they enter the room, stop for just a second, look, connect eye contact, and you can smile. I tend to be a winker, so I wink at my students or at my own kids, and that's kind of my style of connecting during neutral times. It might be, Texas Longhorn set or whatever it is. You've got some sort of way to connect that's true and brief and often nonverbal. So the more you can do that, the deeper your connection is. When during those times of big emotion, you're often more successful in co-regulating with that child, no matter how old they are.
Mm-hmm. And what do you feel about if a child's really truly misbehaving towards you? Because it could be misbehaving towards others. I think that's an easier conversation than, wow, I really notice you're really being critical of like my parenting, or critical of what's going on, or critical of me as a person. I mean, I hear, I know teens know how to push buttons, right? And there's a lot of like, God, they knew just which thing to
turn that knife. Yes.
Yeah, turn that knife. Any thoughts on that?
On what to do as a parent if that is happening?
Yeah. Or how to have a conversation with them about, the behavior towards me,
right,
pushing my buttons, criticizing me, tearing me down as a parent is not appropriate.
Yeah, it's not helpful. It's not kind. It's not respectful. One word can sum that up when something like that happens, and it's a simple ouch. Ooh. So when a child says something to you like, "You're a man, I hate you," or "You're not my real mom," that can absolutely come out. A simple, and I say that it's simple, but it's hard to do, especially when we hear those words that go right to our heart. But if we can put our hand to our heart or to our chest, or take a deep breath and say, ouch. And if at all possible, disengage in that moment, go regulate yourself, go get some water. And when emotions calm down, then you can revisit that. That, ouch, that really hurt when you said that thing this morning. Period. That really hurt. You can often follow with a request. You were frustrated this morning because we were in a big rush, and you yelled and it really hurt. What can we do differently tomorrow or the next day or the next day? Is there something? And then you could shift into problem solving mode, because that big emotion hasn't hijacked the front part of the brain, which helps us be logical and think clearly, right? But when that big emotion comes out, it's often not connected so much to the front of the brain, right?
Amy, this has been lovely. Will you tell people where they can find more out about you and your information?
Absolutely. Gosh, I wish we had more time, because I love talking with you. This is great.
Well, we found out we had lots in common before we hit record.
Sure did. Yeah, so I'm Amy Williams Academy, and you can find me on Instagram, Amy Williams Academy, Facebook, Amy Williams Academy, LinkedIn, the same. And my website is amywilliamsacademy.com. And I do one-on-one family coaching, teacher education. I have a family series that's coming up in January. It's a 5-week series that covers what we talked about today and how to deal with difficult behaviors, which is, a lot of families are struggling with right now. I'm hearing more and more and more families with deep concern about anxiety in the life of their child. And it's scary. So we'll talk about that as well. So that's coming up in January, and registration will be open for that really soon.
Yeah, teachers and parents alike are just talking about the gap of COVID, right? And whether kids were just, in front of a screen for school and then play because they really couldn't do anything else, or gaps in education, changes in education. It's really, and I've talked to people in Hong Kong about this. I've talked to people in Europe about, like, it's everywhere,
Yeah.
And it's just really, it's hard.
It's
right?
hard. Yes. And there's hope. There's hope. There was still, remember Absorbent Mind? There was still something happening during all of that lockdown time, right? So children were learning how to be in a family, in a unit. What happens when oh gosh, what, we have to cook our own meal? You got to be kidding me. So oftentimes when that's maybe another conversation we could talk about.
That's another conversation, but this is awesome, Amy. So I do have one more question for you. If you got to broadcast your voice to the entire world for 1 minute and say anything you wanted to the entire world, no right or wrong answers, what would you like
No pressure, no pressure at all. No. What would my message be? Is that the question?
Yeah, what would you say? Your 1 minute message.
Oh my gosh. I wish I would have prepared for this. I
didn't let Amy prepare for anything. Now you guys know how good she is, because I asked her all the questions on the fly.
I think my message would be how important it is to give yourself a break and to give yourself some grace, and to embrace the idea that we can be friendly with error. And that's a Montessori speak to friendliness with error, to sit in mistakes, as long as there's not blood or brain or broken hearts, then you could sit with that mistake and go, okay, I did that. I'm going to be friendly with that because I am human, and I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to yell at my kids. I'm going to say that thing that I want to bring back into my mouth and re-script, right? So to be friendly with error and say, I said that, or I did that thing, I'm sorry. And I don't want to do that again. So this is what I'm going to do to not do that again, right? So there's always a way, almost always a way to repair, right? But first comes that self-recognition that I want to be friendly with error, because that's where learning happens. You don't learn how to hula hoop unless you drop your hula hoop a couple times, right?
My daughter, she's pretty serious about the hula hoop competition at field day. She's done pretty well. I'm sure we got some ribbons in our house. Okay. She did not learn that from her mother. She did not learn that from her mother, but yeah, she's got some serious hula hooping. I love that analogy. Amy, you guys check Amy out at Amy Williams Academy. And Amy, thank you for helping us become toxic person proof.
Thank you, Sarah.